Welcome once again to those of you who are joining us online or watching this back later. My name is Nikki and I do work at APRA AMCOS. I'm here on the Zoom call this evening with my colleague Al, also at APRA AMCOS, and of course, Berish Bilander from Green Music Australia. Thank you for joining us. I would like to begin this evening with an acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land from which I'm joining you, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and just take a moment to be thankful for the amazing land that I'm on, for the sunshine that we got today, and just to celebrate the connection that our First Nations people have with the land and now that we are able to benefit from as well. And of course, I would like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional owners wherever you may be this evening, to our cousins in Aotearoa who might be joining us, and to any First Nations callers who may be joining us on this video Zoom. So this evening, you will notice that we don't have the chat facility open. Instead, you have a Q&A text facility down in your Zoom browser. So if you do have any questions as the night rolls along, please type those into the Q&A. Al and I are not experts in Green Music Australia, but we will do our best to answer anything there. Of course, if it's beyond our realm, then we can mark it to be answered live by Berish at the end of tonight's session. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes to do some live Q&A for you. I guess the only other things I need to let you know are to enjoy, take it all in. Tonight's session is being recorded and we will make it available to you via email in the next couple of days or maybe a week or so, depends on our comms team workload. So without any further ado, please let me introduce Berish Bilander. He's a passionate climate advocate and social justice campaigner, currently the CEO of Green Music Australia. Under his leadership, the organisation has spearheaded national initiatives aimed at transforming the music industry's response to climate change, driving meaningful action and cultural shifts across the sector. Beyond his advocacy work, Berish is himself a highly accomplished musician. I'm so sorry. What a slip up to make. A musician, everybody, making him extra qualified to be here tonight. He has toured extensively with his own ensembles and performed as freelance artist alongside iconic acts such as Vika and Linda Bull. His creative and community leadership is further reflected in his fellowships with the Banff International Jazz and Creative Music Program and the Change Agency's Community Organising Fellowship. We are thrilled to welcome you, Berish, to be here this evening, share your insights, experiences, and your vision for a more sustainable and socially conscious music industry. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Nikki. God, I hope I am in a museum one day. That would be quite the achievement. Look, that was such a beautiful welcome. I really appreciate it. And I love what APRA does, such a great organization. And so delighted to be here to share a little bit about our journey and specifically what I think might be of interest to songwriters, the musician community. So I suppose first and foremost, just a little bit about Green Music. We were founded some 11 years ago and by a guy called Tim Hollow, who is a mentor of mine. He's a beautiful classical violinist that played in a band called Foreplay, and also an avid climate warrior who's worked at Greenpeace and a lot of other places. And I'll get into the origin story a little bit more in a sec, but I would say that First Nations first, this whole principle that I think is broadly accepted now amongst the music community, is something that it's a real guiding light when it comes to Green Music Australia. First Nations people are the original custodians, and when we think of custodianship, we think of land management, caring for place, which we should do, but they're also the first song people, and the two interwoven so beautifully. You know, their understanding of country was captured in songs, and their ability to find place and recall stories of place to future generations wasn't written down; it was sung up. So I think, you know, the intersection where green music sits between music and country and place is very much a place that First Nations people have been. So I've got this flag just to remind us that always was, always will be Aboriginal land, and I'm really grateful to elders past, present for. Well, the country I'm on is Naarm, Melbourne, in Wurundjeri, on Wurundjeri land. But yeah, I'm sure we're all calling in from different parts of this continent. So as I was saying, our unique role in the music sector, we are a not-for-profit, a charity that is funded in part by philanthropy, in part by the government, in part by our members. You know, we've got some wonderful people that have been with us from the beginning, like Missy Higgins. Uh, we've got excellent patrons that include John Butler and Montaigne, Rhoda Roberts, who I'll talk about a bit more later. And we occupy this important space that not many other charities are in sitting between climate and music. Like I said, Tim Hollow started it some 12 years ago, and in that time, we've grown from a volunteer-run initiative to a staff of about 5 people. We're still small, but we're able to roll out programs nationally. And the main reason why the initiative started up is because music matters, you know. It's put poverty on global stages. It's forced us to reckon with our colonial history. We haven't done enough of that reckoning, but it's certainly made us realize the extent to the injustices, or at least some people that were really not plugged in. It's provided the soundtrack to the civil rights movement. It's just the number of times that music has been giving people transformational experiences and putting the topics of our time at the forefront. It's hard to count, but you know, climate is probably the issue of our time, climate change. And the music scene wasn't and hasn't spoken up about climate change in the same way that they were on other issues. And I think that was a big reason why Tim wanted to form the organization. I think part of the reason was the amount of trash that and just the I mean, I suppose when I was touring as a musician with Vicar and Linda Bull and other acts, like there was a fair bit of rubbish in the audience. There was a fair bit of rubbish up on stage. You know, I'd crack a single-use water bottle back of house and then get called to do a sound check and then go back of house again. And I couldn't recognize which water bottle was mine. So then I'd open another one and then get called out for a photo shoot and then go back and open up another one. And you know, that alongside the demands of touring when it comes to travel and jumping on flights, I think was really making it difficult for artists to confidently speak out. They were feeling too hypocritical in this space. And so Green Music was formed to try to join two things together because we were really conscious that we wanted to help the music scene go greener, but there was a bigger vision around empowering artists' voices for climate, like harnessing that immense cultural power. So what we've been doing over the last while, and I'll go into some programs in great depth today, ones that I think will be of relevance to you as songwriters, but we've been driving carbon and waste reductions across the sector. We're removing barriers and enabling the sector to act with integrity. So that's like a core foundational philosophy of ours. We are connecting musicians to the environmental movement. We're running advocacy campaigns, and some of you might have seen No Music on a Dead Planet, a campaign we ran up in the lead up to the last federal election. Uh, we we run training, community building. We really do see community as the most important thing, the most important resource or weapon. That's I don't really like that metaphor, but weapon we have when it comes to tackling climate change is really community power coming together at the grassroots level to affect change rather than going at it alone. Because certainly, I think a lot of the systems, the colonial systems that have got us to this point, are about extraction, but they're also about atomization, individualization, everyone doing it their own thing individually and not talking and not doing it as a group. So we're very much about working in community. Um, the key programs we run, I mean, this is just a small list of them. No Music on a Dead Planet, I mentioned, that usually pops up around major national moments like election time. But through the year, we run a whole bunch of others. We run peer-to-peer, like mentorship and alliances, I suppose you could call them. Party with the Planet is one of them. The Music Product Stewardship Alliance is another. Training programs like the Green Action Program, a bunch of businesses have been through them, including AAM in the last cohort, Association of Artist Managers, labels, venues, etc. Uh, we've even got a camping buddy, which is like an app we're developing to give patrons better to help patrons plan better for their favorite camping festivals because most of the waste generated at a festival comes from the campsites. Um, Something I'm going to talk a fair bit about today, though, is Sound Country. It's a resource we specifically developed for musicians because there weren't many of them out there at the time. There were a lot of resources for event managers wanting to do better with their events, but there was not much that spoke to musicians directly about their craft, their career, how they can leverage their artistic practice to do better. And there wasn't much also that spoke from uh, our perspective. And our perspective, I think the unique thing about Australia is that uh, the number of First Nation countries that were here before colonization and how much wisdom there is in that. So we were really fortunate to get the support of Rhoda Roberts, who I mentioned earlier, a Bundjalung elder, and she contributed a whole range of insights and information into this guide, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. It's really easily accessible, soundcountry.org, and you can download a PDF, and it will have things like this. It's set on a bunch of principles. The big picture is earth-centered thinking, First Nations first, action-oriented, aiming upwards. Wonderful principles to dive into it, and you can apply them really to anything in your life. It's divided into chapters, and that's a really good way of going where you feel like your energy is. We're all about is that principle of action oriented. We're all about just going where you're feeling like you've got momentum and building on that momentum. And there's magic in making stuff happen, even if it's small. So yeah, the chapters include transport, waste, food, music releases, fashion and merch. We're going to get stuck into three of them in some detail in a moment. It's also got a checklist that helps you feel like you're making some progress with first steps, bigger steps, and then, the ultimate wins. It's um, it's an interactive website. So it's this map that we had designed by Steph Hughes, who's a beautiful musician herself, but a great illustrator. And you can just click on bits of it that interest you and then go into the guide, and that can be a way in. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to find an entrance point because I should say sustainability can be pretty overwhelming. There's a heap of science. There's really impenetrable, difficult stuff when it comes to global warming, but there's also really easy entrance points. And another way that we're trying to get people involved is through case studies. I think if you can see people like ourselves doing the things, then it really helps us find a road in ourselves. So there's a heap of case studies featured throughout the guide. Um, there's also a green artist hospitality writer. So we've got a few templates in there that you can just literally download and adjust yourself and start using tomorrow. Uh, when I first started with the organization, I was working on a campaign called BYO Bottle, and that was all about trying to get those single-use plastic water bottles out of the music scene. And it was amazing how many artists had in their hospitality writer a request for a slab or some number of water bottles, single-use disposable ones, but they didn't even know it was in there. It didn't occur to them that they could just be traveling with a reusable bottle or asking for tap water to be provided in a glass, basically. And so yeah, we've been pushing that really strongly, and we're really happy to see more and more venues offering more and more venues. Our great friends at Brunswick Ballroom, like making it mandatory that artists they don't accept artist writers anymore that ask them for single-use plastic water bottles. So there's really great stuff happening in that space. Feel free to use the QR code and just download that immediately and start using it. As I said, Rhoda's given us a heap of tips, and it's featured in the First Nations First section. It's the first chapter. There's stuff for allyship, so for allies to keep in mind as we try to uh, work productively to support and centre First Nations voices. So uh, I learned a lot from this process with Rhoda, and I reckon most people would learn something from this and can apply it in their day to day. But without further ado, we're going to do a deep dive because I was prompted by the APRA crew to think about these three areas where it's likely there's a bit more interest. So, physical music releases. I know a lot of people are doing releases, and maybe their primary release strategy is digital. Uh, we're not going to cover that much because, well, there's a whole range of ethical considerations on whether or not the digital releases are the right thing for you. But when it comes to data in the cloud, that's um, these huge servers that run thousands and thousands of hard drives holding our information and the heating and cooling that goes into them. I mean, they're highly intensive when it comes to energy use, but there's not a whole lot we can do. Most of them are not based in Australia, uh, and they're based overseas. And certainly the bigger companies like your Amazons, Googles, Apples have some commitments, some sustainability commitments, although, like with all multinationals, they're not necessarily as robust as they should be. It's a whole nother area that I'm really happy to discuss in the Q&A, but I'm not going to go into much detail around digital releases. Merchandise, again, we're looking at the physical because there's a whole heap you can do in the physical realm, and travel is an interesting one that I think is often the elephant in the room when it comes to looking at our carbon emissions and trying to do better on sustainability as an artist. So with physical music releases, um, there are three impacts. Uh, Often, if in the context of sustainability or climate action, we're often thinking about the two negative impacts. So we're thinking about the material impacts, so the natural resources and the waste from manufacturing and disposal. That could literally be the vinyl albums, and if you find that they end up in landfill at the end, or the process of manufacturing them, which we'll go into. There's the carbon emissions themselves generated from the product creation and the freight, so the movement of those products, which can be quite substantial. There's also a positive impact, which is the cultural impact. So songs that have a powerful message. And I don't want to downplay that because, we're not for a second suggesting that there shouldn't be any music released because the best music is, acoustic. I'm a massive advocate for acoustic music, but I think if you're releasing music, we do have to consider that the cultural impact of most of our music is extraordinarily good. It's a good thing for society to have songwriters and beautiful music, and certainly music that speaks to the stories of our time, like climate. But we've got to start dealing with some of the material impacts and the carbon emissions. So, consideration for music products in order: the place of manufacturer, then the quantity of stock, then the type of product, and number four, the packaging. And so I'll go in those orders, and they are from most important to least important when it comes to the kind of impact you can make. Roughly 80% of vinyl records sold in Australia are pressed in North America or Europe. So we did a deep dive with our friends at the Music Product Stewardship Alliance, which includes most of the major labels, a lot of the independent labels. JB Hi-Fi was represented as one of the major retailers, and we had the distributors in the room and manufacturers. And we were surprised, yeah, to learn that many products that are sold locally are actually manufactured overseas. Um, and most of them aren't just manufactured overseas, but they are air freighted into the country. And you can see that this graph shows, like, if you're bringing something in from the US or from Europe, it's substantially more carbon intensive. And so, uh, our advice in this context is very much to try to manufacture locally or local to where you think most of the product's going to be sold. And we're working hard to try and find best case, solutions. Um, there are some labels that are doing great things, like actually manufacturing in multiple locations to try to minimize this part of the carbon footprint. And we absolutely think that's best case. I'm happy to talk more about that. Um, the quantity of stock is a really another important thing to think about. So, you know, we might focus on, and I will talk about packaging later, like, for example, whether or not you've got shrink wrap on something. But to be honest, if you press far too much, and you have to throw that excess stock into the landfill, you have to destroy it. That is a huge burden on the environment. It's not at all environmentally sustainable. So moving away from large runs, and I know that if you go larger, you can get the unit costs down, but I think avoiding that temptation is really important. Excess stock is hard to recycle. It's expensive to destroy. It's not a great thing to hold on to it. It fills up warehouses. It's just a difficult thing. So know your audience. Try to press the right amount of stock, and if need be, press more down the road. Yeah. The next thing is about the product type. So I'm just going to focus on vinyl for a second. Most vinyl historically has been made from PVC, and PVC stands for polyvinyl chloride. It's a pretty toxic plastic, and the process hasn't changed an awful lot in the last, say, 100 years. Uh, what's encouraging is there are new ways of doing records coming onto the market. So vinyl, people do talk about regrind. For the most part, regrind is usually just scraps of PVC vinyl that have been cut off to make virgin plastic cuts, and the scrap are basically reassembled and chipped up and melted down and then used for a, a new album, and that's often rebadged as regrind. It's not fully reclaimed stock that's recycled or anything like that. It's still virgin uh, PVC, but it's just offcut. So it's certainly better than throwing those offcuts in the bin, but it's not quite what sometimes people might expect. Biovinyl is a marketing term for a low carbon compound. The technology usually uses waste gases and oils uh, to create something that's almost identical to virgin PVC. The benefit it's got in the order of 44% reduction in emissions. So uh, we're really pleased that through the alliance we were working with, the Product Stewardship Alliance, the manufacturers, and there are three in Australia, I believe, and one in New Zealand, have all gotten together and have started to import some of this biovinyl into the country, making it more affordable for people to use. So, do get in touch with us, or I can connect you directly with the manufacturers, the local manufacturers who are providing this product, because it might be a better solution than certainly printing overseas, but using a virgin PVC. Uh, in the context of CDs, there are really three options that I'm aware of: dual case, digipack, and soft pack. And there is no comparison between dual case and soft pack. Like, dual cases use polystyrene, sort of semi-durable plastic, but we all know how easy they are to break. I've got countless sleeves that are broken at home. They have a pretty high carbon footprint and they're difficult to recycle. Digipacks are a bit better, but they've also got that plastic inner casing, so they're not as low pack. But soft packs are plastic free, entirely made out of cardboard with a cardboard sleeve. They reduce the impact of the CD by about 95%. I should say that the CD itself is more or less standard worldwide. There's not a lot you can do to change the impact of a CD, because it needs to be up to a certain standard so it can be played in a CD player. And if people are asking on this call, why are we talking about CDs? No one makes CDs anymore. When we last checked with ARIA and got the stats, there were quite a few more CDs still being sold in Australia than vinyl, like um, in the order of, I think, 2 to 3 million. Don't quote me, but there was very much a downward trend on CDs, but there's still obviously a market for CDs in this country. Um, Finally, we're thinking about packaging. Uh, Shrink wrap often comes up. It's probably the most obvious example of being unsustainable, and a lot of artists have brought it up with us. Like, how can we get rid of shrink wrap? Sadly, it's not super easy to get rid of. There are some alternatives, and I think one of the best ones we've seen is the paper wrapping or obi strips. I know that King Gizzard and In Heart's Wake, those two bands, both managed to get their stock into JB Hi-Fi with paper wrapping. But for the most part, major retailers don't want to deal with stock that isn't they only want to deal with stock that's shrink wrapped, which is something we're working on. But at this point in time, it's the actual impact of the shrink wrap is substantially less than all the other things I just mentioned. So if, don't get too hung up on it. If you're doing your own mail order outs, that's different. But if you're dealing with a retailer, it's pretty hard to get around at this point, unless you've got a large clientele base, in which case you can check out our case study on how King Gizzard did it. Um, so moving on to merchandise, uh, what is often a really important revenue stream for musicians when we've seen a lot of our revenue streams eroded over the years. This one can remain is an important thing. And again, I'm not discouraging it, but we have to look at the full gamut of problems with it. And there is a dark side when it comes to merch and fashion in general, with overproduction, short life cycles, creating huge environmental costs. That picture is, there's thousands of these kind of pictures online of basically clothes just being sent to poorer countries to have to deal with the waste problem. Uh, there are often unsustainable materials and processes. There's worker exploitation. Um, there's poor quality garments that end up in landfill more quicker, and fast fashion has sadly become a bit like the norm. Uh, so it's something that we want to work against when we're creating merch. And generally, when we think of anything, we like to go upwards. This I think probably people have seen this kind of pyramid, upside down pyramid, when it comes to, say, the way we'd think of waste at home. But you can apply it to a lot of other situations, and certainly in merch, reducing the need. So certainly not overprinting stock. You want to just create the right amount. Reusing wherever possible. Repairing, I mean, maybe that applies a little bit more at home, but there are some interesting case studies I'll share in a moment. And all the way down to recycling, finally landfill. We want to avoid that at absolute as much as possible. So we encourage, repurposing existing garments. Buying from charity stores, there's been some interesting examples of people doing that, um, and customizing secondhand garments. There's choosing sustainable fibers. So more and more recycled fabrics are coming onto the market. When we did a merch run for No Music on a Dead Planet campaign, we ran recycled fabric garment, and we were really happy with it. It was a recycled polyester, but I think in future we might even be looking for recycled cottons. If you can't do recycled fabric, there's this wonderful organic fabrics on the market, and that's a really great thing you can do, because cotton that's grown, or hemp or linen, so natural fibers that are grown in an organic setting, mean you've got a heap less toxins used on the soil, like degrading the land. It's usually the product's much better. Again, printing manufacturing locally to reduce freight matters. There's also focusing on good design and good quality to extend the life cycle of the garment. We talked about don't overorder stock that you won't be able to sell. Eliminate plastic packaging wherever possible. There are quite a few merchandise companies now that can ship your product with zero plastic, and use your platform to educate your audiences. So, make sustainability desirable, not a chore. I think it's, like I said, it's great to get examples of real life where people have done things. And this case study of DMAs who bought secondhand clothing from a charity store and sewed on their patches. They sold them as one-offs on Depop. They all sold out. They got really good returns on the products in terms of the profit margin, and zero waste, extremely low footprint in terms of the environmental consequence. But excellent merchandise campaign. Lime Cordial is another case study. They live screen printed at gigs. Fans brought their own clothing. This model has been used by a bunch of different bands. I've seen them do it. 1975 in the UK did it. They actually used merch that was sitting in a warehouse from a tour that they had to cancel from a previous year. They just screen printed over the top of that merch, and people loved it. So I think there is a way to make sure that old merch and unused stock does get a second life. Annie Hamilton really concentrated on creating stylish merch that stood out from the typical band tees. That was important for her audience. She made to order hemp and and mesh product that reduced excess stock, locally made and printed in Sydney, and got pre-orders again to help with that made to order stuff. She included a whole bunch of custom education on sustainability. So was taking her fans through a bit of a journey with the product to understand about fast fashion. So that's it for the merch section. Again, I can return to any of those later in the Q&A. And final chapter I want to discuss is transport. So again, the big one here, we've pictured bike parking at a festival, but I think a lot of us, when we think about transport, we think about flights. And as this graph shows, flights are certainly the biggest when it comes to the transport emissions comparison. You can see where flights land versus a petrol, a standard petrol car, a hybrid car, a coach like a bus there is a bit lower, train is lower still. And so, really what we can see here is public transport wins out. Currently, transport is around 10% of Australia's annual emissions, and it's growing. It's actually one of the fastest growing areas of our emissions. We're trying to reduce the total emissions in our country, and if anyone's following general action on climate change, we want to see a downward trajectory in carbon emissions as rapidly as possible to keep us on track to limit global warming to a manageable amount, so we're not seeing Pacific Islands going underwater, so we're not seeing extreme heat waves hit our country for longer periods of time, or all sorts of other and unnatural disasters. So we have to take transport quite seriously. And an average Aussie tour of 15 shows generates around 28 tons of emissions. That comes from our friends at Heidi Lenfer at Cloud Control, who did those maths for her organization FEET. Planes are the most problematic, and so we need to think about them. Obviously, we can avoid flying wherever possible, and we try to do that at Green Music. We're always asking ourselves the question: do we need to be there in person? Can we do something like this? What we're doing today? Can we do it online? If that's not possible, then we try to plan as best as possible. So booking tour dates well in advance, getting the best itinerary so we're not flying around the country twice over. We're doing the shortest routes, the best routes possible. Bringing as little backline as possible. It all supports lower emissions. Another thing that I wasn't able to I wouldn't have been able to say this some month ago, but over the last few weeks, we've launched our certification program. So there are a handful of venues in New South Wales at the moment that are certified green. And our hope is that it'll expand nationally, and there will be venues around the country that are certified green with a star rating up to 5 stars. And so one of the things you can do if you have to fly and you have to travel a fair bit for your work is try to book venues that are doing the right thing, or at the very least ask your venues you like to play at whether they can go through the certification process, because we all rely on venues to play at. And if they're doing better, that doesn't mean they're just doing better for our gig. It means they're doing better for every gig. They're often open 4, 5, sometimes 7 nights a week playing music. And these venues that are lifeblood of our music scene are really substantial in terms of their impact, but they're also substantial in the kind of changes they can make. We've released a report on it just the last week and been doing a bit of media around it. But yeah, if you go to the Green Venue Directory, that's the link right there. You can see the 9 venues. It's from really small places like La La La's in Wollongong through to bigger end of town like the International Convention Centre in Sydney has also done the certification. But there's a really important thing to remember with this, and that audience transport is 10 times more emissions intensive than artist transport. So we often get hung up on how can we do better? How can we set the highest bar? And I love that people are doing that. And I've got a couple case studies later of musicians doing really good things in this space. But I think we have to remember that there's that many more audience members at our gigs. If we're playing a festival, there's potentially thousands of people at the show. And how they get to the gig, whether they've driven, whether there's just one person in the car or 5, whether they've taken public transport or ridden to the gig, that's really the critical question. If there's a lot of people jumping on planes to see our show, then that is going to be significantly worse than how we get to the show ourselves. So shifting audience behavior is key. Um, we've got stuff on this, a fair bit of this on in Sound Country, but just an example below is an audience transport communications template. So letting people know how to get to your gig, um, even providing them with some kind of incentive is a great idea to really step up and encourage them to do it. Some bigger acts like Coldplay and uh, Billie Eilish and others have actually worked with public transport infrastructure, or the municipal body that controls public transport. So in the case of London, they've worked with the UK Transport Authority to make sure that there's more trains put on. And look, most of us on this call aren't necessarily booking out stadiums and have that kind of relationship. But I think just putting the data, putting how proximate the venue is to whatever train station or bus stop is really helpful. Um, and yeah, rewarding fans if they do come that way. Finally, I suppose if it's just unavoidable and you have to get to the show in a carbon intensive way like flying, there is the route of offsetting. And again, this is something we could talk about at length because, the idea of carbon offsets, for those that don't know about them, we're essentially trying to make up for the damage that we've inflicted by pushing more carbon into the atmosphere by paying for something that takes carbon out of the atmosphere in equal amounts. So if we've created 1 ton of carbon emissions through our flight, we want to say purchase a renewable energy or plant some trees or fund a project rather than plant some trees, and that will remove 1 ton from the atmosphere. The idea of carbon neutrality comes from this idea that we are completely offsetting the emissions and negating our impact. The problem with this, and those switched on to this whole world, is that there are lots of organizations, uh, big multinationals in particular, that use them to avoid reducing emissions in the first place, and they're never as effective as not creating the problem in the first place. Always, like I showed you that upside down pyramid earlier, reduction is key, trying to avoid the problem in the first place. Our world can't survive on offsets. It needs tangible reductions. And a lot of offsets are sketchy, as that little clip reveals in The Guardian. More than 90% of rainforest carbon offsets by the biggest certifiers are worthless, analysis shows. So if you do go offset, it should be a last resort and you need to know what you're doing. So if short of actually offsetting, and we do have a bunch of advice on Sound Country about where to go if you do want to actually get that certified carbon neutral brand or label that you can apply. There are alternatives to offsetting. There's more and more people talking about insetting as opposed to offsetting. And insetting is this idea of investing the money you would have used to offset in reducing your actual emissions. So, a good offset often costs around $35 per ton. So if you were to say work out how much emissions your tour has generated, and that's something we can help you with. There's also a bunch of carbon calculators out there that help you estimate how carbon intensive your tour was. You can you can either pay for them in a traditional offsetting, or you can use that money to do better things. For example, it could pay for that incentive I was talking about, where maybe you're shouting audience members their first free drink if they come and they can demonstrate they've come by public transport. That costs money, but you could fund that through this insetting instead of offsetting. Uh, our organization, instead of paying for an offset, all the travel emissions we calculated that we generated in 2024, we then donated to Seed Mob, that's Indigenous Youth for Climate Justice organization. So, there are ways of non-traditional offsetting models that I think were well worth considering. Um, Finally, some case studies that I think are helpful. Yeah, so Lime Cordial partnered with Feet that have something called the Solar Slice. So that helps you take $1 off every ticket. And the Good Car Company to pilot an electric van for their regional tour. In 10 days, they went over 3,000 kilometers and saved $600 and 362 liters of fuel, reduced emissions by 600 kilograms. So, that was a really great thing. I think importantly, they shared this story through their fan base. And it's something that we've got up as a resource to help other artists try to do the same thing. Uh, a small artist called Gayla ran a tour using only public transport. She selected specific venues by how readily accessible they were by public transport, and then did offer discounted tickets for fans who pledged to use public transport. She caught the overnight train from Melbourne to Sydney. I've done that a few times. It's certainly not the easiest train to catch. So she was really committed and kind of made it a feature of her tour. It was like the public transport tour. Um, I've got this oldish kind of graph it's a pie chart from 2008. You'll see things like, I should say, this is what at the time was seen as the music sector emissions from the UK. And it's well out of date. You know, you can see CD lifecycle emissions is 26% of this pie chart. And there's no way that CD lifecycle emissions represent that level. It's probably digital streaming platforms or something now. But audience travel is significant. It's like 43%. Then you got tour buses and equipment trucking. And basically, if you combined the travel component of this, then you'd be looking at about half of the entire music sector's emissions come from either musicians themselves or crew or audience members getting to and from gigs. And I don't think that bit of the pie chart from the data we've managed to put together over the last few years, it seems pretty consistent that about half of emissions are coming from travel. And when we look at the various things that need to be done, a lot of them, those solutions already exist. So, you know, if I start top left, we've got having strong, good services. So, you know, if we're going to take public transport, we want to know that we can jump on a tram, bus, or train. There'll be one waiting for us. It's not going to be an hour till the next one, that they go late into the night. So that's about really usually a state body that is programming and planning services. And, you know, if we want to see more services like bus services, that's something that only the state bodies can put on more buses. Similarly, if you're going to jump on a bike, uh, a lot of people mark safety as the number one reason they're not jumping on their bike to get to and from a location. So, you know, when people put in dedicated bike lanes, as can be seen in middle top, is something that when Melbourne's done more and more of that, we've seen greater uptake of bike usage. So again, it's an infrastructure change that really only the government can do. Building tram lines across, or train lines for that matter, so that bottom left one, again, it's only our governments that are going to be able to do that. This is not something we can do individually. And putting in electric charging or helping to reduce the cost of electric vehicles and putting higher penalties for traditional fuel-based vehicles, sorry, petrol-based vehicles, I should say. That's, again, something that the federal government can be looking at and are looking at. Getting our grid that powers electric things like trains, trams, and electric vehicles, making sure that our grid is powered by renewable energy is, again, largely the domain of government. And the only one really that can't be done tomorrow, or improved at least tomorrow, is sustainable aviation fuels. There's a lot of talk around it, but to be honest, at this point in time, there isn't really a silver bullet when it comes to flying. The general rule is if you want to be somewhere really quickly, it's an unsustainable thing to do. So we'd either got to slow down the speed at which we're traveling from A to B, or there's some miracle fuel that I'm not aware of. But yeah, there's a lot of problems when it comes to aviation fuels. Um, so really, we've got 5 out of 6 things I can think of here are solutions that the government can do. And the reason the government's not doing it is because they don't have sufficient political pressure on them. Okay. So I think the final point I want to leave with people, and it's a major chapter that I haven't gone into today in Sound Country, is speaking up. So using our voice to create change. You know, it cycles back to that first slide, one of those early slides I talked about, music matters. And yeah, the point here is that musicians collectively, we tell the stories of our time. And if we're starting to tell the story of climate change, we have to tell a story of a disconnection with the only place in this whole universe that sustains us. And that disconnection means that we do silly things like we build houses and shopping centers and create cities that are only accessible via cars, which are completely unsustainable modes of transport, particularly if we're going as single occupancy drivers. And then there are also great ways of disconnecting us from each other, which creates all sorts of other cultural problems. So I think, I want to leave you with this idea that there is a really important role for us to play in terms of creating music, creating messages that speak to the need to get active in the world of climate. And certainly in the case of transport, when our governments take this seriously, they invest in public transport, they invest in bicycle infrastructure, they invest in charging stations for EV and in transitioning our grid away from old dirty fossil fuels, then you're going to see people traveling in a much more sustainable way, and you're going to see the related emissions go down significantly. So look, that's the end of the presentation. I feel like I've talked for a long time, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts, ideas. Yeah, have a bit of a yarn. That'd be lovely.
Thank you so much, Berish.
Absolute pleasure.
So much information and so in depth, and really, really important information. Uh, there are so many incredible resources that Green Music have created on the website, and I really recommend that everyone jumps onto the website and definitely downloads Sound Country for sure. It's just amazing how much information is in there and suggestions. So thank you so much. That's just,
Pleasure,
yeah,
Al. It's a
really
delight.
great.
I wish I was in the same room as everyone.
Yeah, me too. But it's so good to have you here. If anyone has any questions for Berish, can you please put them in the Q&A? But Berish, before or as people are sort of, if anyone has anything to ask, I thought I'd just maybe ask, is there like a number one thing as a punter or an audience member that they can do to reduce impact?
Good question. What's the number one thing audience members can do?
I
I
mean, you can list a couple more if you want. You don't have to
Yeah.
list it.
I mean, like I was just banging on about travel, and obviously
Mm,
like trying to travel to gigs in a lower footprint way, like using public transport, biking, acknowledging that, it depends where you live. If you're in a privileged situation where the music venue is in a major city, which is serviced by public transport through the night, all well and good. But if you're in a regional area, that's not going to work for you. So
mm,
I think I would actually say music fans getting involved in some way is probably the most powerful thing. And
mm,
it's not necessarily a doing thing. It's like letting the artist that they love know about this guide, for example, letting the artist that they love uh, hear about their desire to purchase, for example, from them a more sustainable album if they were to make it. So being champions and cheering on, certainly applauding when one of the artists that they like does something. I think if artists hear from music fans that they love what they're doing, whether it's like just posting about a climate rally through to, yeah, producing a more sustainable album or doing a merch campaign, as Jack River did in her last merch campaign with hemp products, like I think if they hear from their fan base, like, good on you, I love it, I'm buying this, I'm going to let my friends know about it. That
mm,
and similarly with venues, like we've got, as I said, just 9 venues that have done the certification, but the more venues hear these messages from fans from the people that attend these venues, from the artists that play at them, the more likely they are to invest in the time that's required, and everyone's got competing priorities. Like
mm,
venues, it's not exactly an easy time for a lot of the music sector. I know there was a big gathering of people talking about AI today. There's just the world is a complex beast, and technology is moving so rapidly, none of us can keep up. But um, I think we've already got these established connections with artists we love, or with venues we like to attend, or festivals we like to go to, and being one of those people that jump on socials and comment in a positive way. It might seem really minor, but it enables the change makers within these organizations to step up, gives them, yeah, the cred that they need within their own teams to say, hey, look, people care and people value this.
Definitely. Thank you. We have had a question come in around, I think it's Anna, has asked, is it possible to go eco and save money?
Yeah.
So, you know, how, I guess it's just a question around like cost. And, you know, are there ways in which you can do that through merchandise or
Yeah.
travel, yeah.
I've got a few ideas that come to mind.
Mm,
There are some situations where creativity is needed. So, like in the case of the DMA's example I gave earlier, buying some secondhand products and sewing a badge on them and then making them feel like really important pieces of merchandise
mm,
and being able to attach a higher price tag. That may or may not work for, your fan base, but I think that just showed a level of creativity. And if we apply that creativity as songwriters, like to our craft, to our art, sometimes we apply it to our marketing campaigns. I think you can apply it to sustainability as well. You can come up with interesting ideas and try to execute. But there is often a problem insofar as so it's just uh, how do I begin this? I'm trying to do it in the simplest way. Um, a lot of things in our economy, whether it's merchandise or other products, have externalities. So they're pushing the problems in the making of the product to somewhere else. So the problem could be slave labor. It could be, paying people below living wage in Bangladesh.
mm,
And you don't see that harm. It's not embedded in the price of the product. Similarly, if that same Bangladesh factory is pumping toxins into the local water supply, that isn't realized. It should be in the cost of the product. It should be something we see, and therefore it should be more expensive than the organic t-shirt that's made in an ethical way. Sadly, it's not. And so, short of coming up with those creative ways at the moment, until we're able to really have an enormous overhaul of our economic system, which is what's required. We actually need that level of structural change. And certainly, like First Nations principles that we embed into our philosophy and thinking at Great Music demand nothing less than that. Like that's
mm,
the level of structural change required. Until that happens, we're going to see these distortions that economically don't make any sense. Products that do a lot of harm don't cost a lot of money. That said, there are a few places where it comes together. So, in the case of energy, it's starting to come together. So, if, for example, you make changes, we saw this. It's not necessarily the same for an artist as the example I'm going to give, but with the work we're doing with venues, music venues, we're seeing that with minimal investment, they can save around $10,000 a year. Um, they're actually reducing their energy consumption. So, because energy costs money, electricity costs money, and it's going up year on year. If you're able to do things like better draft proof your built environment, if you're able to put better seals on your fridges, if you're able to, in some cases, put solar panel on the roof, um, or change your operations just a little bit, like lower the thermostat by instead of heating, on a winter's day to 21, heat to 20 or 19 or 18. Those subtle operational shifts and all the other things I mentioned, sometimes the return on investment is, a few months, sometimes it's 3 years. It's not much more than 3 years with solar panels these days. And after that point, you're making return on investment, as in you're saving money and you're doing better stuff for the environment. So like energy does line up at the moment because renewable energy has come down so much in cost. And a lot of these other things I talked about, like this draft proofing and stuff, are very, very low cost solutions. This makes sense in the case of, say, if you're a musician and you run a studio and you've got some built environment or an office or something. But outside of where there's alignment, a lot of the time there isn't that alignment, and I wish there was. I wish it was aligned. I wish it wasn't a compromise that people had to make. I wish, like, yeah, you want to do the right thing and purchase sustainable merch. It's going to cost you less. No, sadly, it costs you a fair bit more at the moment.
mm,
We're doing our best to try to get governments to support some of this. Like governments could help uh, local manufacturers produce, say, for example, vinyl cheaper. And if we can get it to a price point, hopefully soon, where people can make local vinyl, and it's competitive with what they would make it if they went to a larger manufacturer overseas.
Do you think that's improving
Y-
in terms of the amount of artists who are getting vinyl locally made in comparison to getting it done overseas?
I mean, it's definitely, from what I can see, it's on an upward trend. Yeah.
Mm,
And that there's more manufacturers in the market, which I think the competitive competition can be healthy
mm,
and they're working together to try and import and better, more sustainable resin, I suppose, that you make the products out of. But I think it's one of those tipping points as well. Like the more artists that do it, certainly the bigger artists that do it, that print larger volumes will help bring down the cost for everyone.
mm.
Yeah, I think that one's solvable. I do. I think we
Yeah.
can really reduce the cost of that stuff and make it an easy sell for people to just be like, the norm now is producing a more sustainable product.
Yeah, I really love the DMA's example of getting their merch from, op shops or wherever they get it from, recycled clothes, and then putting their patch on it. I really love flannels. Like I love flannies so much. And so over the years, I've just found all these flannies that I love from, op shops. And I have this bag of them that I know I'm going to do it one day, but the intention was that that would eventually be merch. So, whether it just said like "owl" on it or something, but I just love that so much. And you're right. I think the idea of an audience connecting with that and thinking it's like a special, potentially like one-off item.
Right.
And the screen printing thing, I know that that's popping up at festivals as well now, which I think is really cool. Thank you, Berish. Just, do we have any more questions pop in? I thought maybe, if not, maybe I just might ask if people want to get involved with green music and want to support what you do, or, actually, can they volunteer? Like how would they approach
Yeah.
that?
For sure. So we've got the wonderful Tim Shield, used to be broadcaster on Triple J Double J, is now community organizing for us, which just means like he's bringing the community together. He's holding various meetups, some in person, some online. So very much encourage people to reach out. There is a volunteer button on our website, but if it's also just artists that not necessarily want to volunteer, they just want to learn more, these meetups are really great places to do that. Yeah, so just you can go to info@greenmusic.org.au and we'll find the right person to connect you with. Because if it's more programmatic and related to like venue certification, let's say you're booking a venue and you want to talk specifically about that venue, like if you go to info out, then we'll be able to direct you to the right person at Green Music. But
Awesome.
we welcome, we're community driven. We are super keen to have people get involved.
Awesome. Well, I think that's actually right on time. So, Berish, thank you so, so much again. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We will send through the recording of this this week or maybe early next week. But yeah, thank you so much again, Berish. It was,
Absolute pleasure.
so wonderful to have you.
Great. I'm glad my internet worked the whole way through.
Awesome. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye bye.